All right, welcome back to Niners Nightly. Larry Krueger with you on the Sports Leader, and joining us on the UMA guest line is Matt Barrows, who covers the Niners for The Athletic, does a bang-up job, and he is with us on the UMA guest line to talk about his last couple pieces and a little bit about the Niners offseason. Matt, how are you?
I'm doing well, Larry. Thank you for having me on.
Well, we loved your piece with Tariq Ahmad. Talk to us a little bit about that one because I just thought that was one of my favorite pieces that I've read this year. I really enjoyed it. I just feel like there's a lot there, a lot of good information in that article. What did you think of your sit down with Tariq?
Yeah, I always enjoy those. I used to do that with Adam Peters, and then obviously Peters is now in Washington. So Ahmad took over his function basically. He's their top college scout, and yeah, kind of getting into the nitty gritty of why the 49ers fell for each of these guys, why these guys are on the team. And I realize it's a little bit of drink the Kool-Aid. Of course, Ahmad's the guy that's drafting them. He's going to say only positive things about them. But I do think that it's interesting what their rationale is a lot of the times. And I'll tell you, two guys that stood out in that conversation were Mykel Williams, the number one overall pick, and then Nick Martin, the third round pick. I came out of that interview with Ahmad thinking that those two guys, at least for 2025, are the most important players in that draft class, and ought to have sizable roles this year as rookies.
Well, let's talk about those guys. Nick Martin, the Niners supposedly had a great combine interview, and it came out in this piece that Johnny Holland and Robert Saleh both really kind of fell in love with this player in the draft process. And it sounds like the Niners didn't just want a fast linebacker who could run around, but they actually wanted somebody who had communicated the defense at the line of scrimmage, who had been responsible for the defensive calls, which is what Martin did at Oak State. And it sounds almost like they are looking for a guy to maybe replace Fred Warner. I mean, obviously they just signed Fred Warner, but they're looking for somebody who's verbal, somebody who could be a leader. And they sounds like that was the leadership and the in addition to the strength and the speed and the big playability, it sounds like they really liked kind of who the person was with Nick Martin.
Yeah, he's a guy with a lot of charisma, and people respond to him. And not just people younger than him. I mean, I've been talking to his um, you know college officials, people at Oklahoma State, and older players responded to him as well. So yeah, I agree with you. I think that the personality played a huge role in that. They're going to have to lean on their defensive rookies a lot this year, and they want somebody sort of leading that group, sort of a subset of the rest of the team, somebody who can push them to watch, an hour extra of film during a day to practice later, to always be sort of the Fred Warner to that rookie class. And so they think that Martin has those skills. And to your early point about Holland and Salah, I think that's the reason why some of these guys end up going a little bit higher than people think they should, or what the consensus draft model says they should go. When the personnel department falls in love with a player like Ahmad and his crew did in Indianapolis, and then the coaching staff has the same reaction when they start to kind of sink their claws into the draft prospects. I think that cohesion, I don't know what the metric would be, bumps the guy up a half a round in their estimation. The point being is that the personnel staff wants to draft players that the coaching staff wants to coach. And so when you have that symbiotic relationship, the chances of the guy flourishing are much better.
the Niners for years had their gold helmet designation. And then I think after maybe McKivitz and Lance and a couple of the guys that they had, Braden Willis, that they let us know that they were gold helmet guys, and that some of these guys obviously have not fulfilled their potential, most notably Trey Lance. Now it seems like they definitely don't want to share that. But I get the sense from your article, without you writing it, that maybe Mykel Williams and Nick Martin were kind of gold helmet designation guys. Have you pushed on that lever at all, and did you get rebuffed on the gold helmet designation? It seems like they were very liberal with their who they shared, who were their guys in the past. They seem very guarded now.
Yeah, I agree. And I did ask, and I was rebuffed. So I don't know who the gold helmet guys are. We didn't know last year either.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's related to, Peter's sort of taking that with him to Washington, and maybe that was kind of his baby. And they either have a different calculus for it or a different name or something. But last year, the speculation was that Malik Mustafa was a gold helmet guy, seemed to hit all the parameters. And Malik Mustafa was one of the, he might have been the top rookie last year. Oh, I guess Dominic Pooney probably has that title. But Pooney, Bernardo Green, and Mustafa really had, standout rookie seasons. And so, if he was a gold helmet guy, then they're still pretty accurate with those. But my guess would be Martin. Ahmad spoke very fondly of Williams and Martin, but he spoke fondly of all the other guys as well. Jordan Watkins, the fourth round wide receiver, stood out to me in the interview. Another, what Ahmad called consensus guy, a guy that the scouting staff liked and that the coaching staff liked. And when you're talking about wide receivers and coaching staff, you're talking about Kyle Shanahan. So has the skills that Shanahan likes in his offense. And you can kind of see that. He didn't do a lot of this at Ole Miss, but the crossing route that are such a big part of the 49ers offense, he seems like a guy who's going to handle those routes well, in that doesn't break concentration, doesn't break stride, has really good hands, and he's got really good speed as well. So taken all together, that suggests that he's going to be good at that aspect of it.
It's funny because you cited, I think, in the piece, the Gauntlet Drill and his speed at the Gauntlet Drill. And I always thought of the Gauntlet Drill as just a total throwaway.
Yeah.
But you know what? They obviously don't. And it is easier if you run at 3/4 speed. It's easy to catch the ball. But if you run at full speed, which is what you got to do in a game, of course, it's much more challenging. And it sounds like they liked how he ran that drill and the speed with which he ran that drill. I kind of like Jordan Watkins from the standpoint of, hey man, he played in the best conference in America. He ran 4.37 and he had tremendous production. And to me, those are quality of competition's a factor, but your speed and your production, if you got both the traits and the production, I like guys who fit in that subsection, and it sounds like Jordan Watkins did, and Shanahan really responded to him, maybe because of it.
Yeah, they also look at that line that the guy's running in that Gauntlet Drill. They want that line to be as straight as possible. And you see some guys, it's basically an S curve because they're concentrating on the ball and they're going back to the ball and they're sort of wheeling around. And, to do it right, you're just running a straight line, basically across the 50-yard line to do it. So they look at that. And Ahmad's point was that it's the best indicator of natural hands that you can get. Yeah, you can look up the PFF figures and those correspond. But to them, when they're scouting these guys, if the guy can run the route, with obstacles, challenges, which is in this case, multiple quarterbacks throwing the ball from either direction, and can do that naturally, that's a good indication.
You had an anecdote in here that was phenomenal, too, that when Steve Rubio, who's, I guess, a 49er scout, went to a Georgia practice, that Mykel Williams that day played every rep, even though he had been nursing a high ankle sprain and even stayed an additional 20 minutes, and the Niners really like that. The one thing, only part of that little nugget that we didn't get the answer to is I wonder if Williams knew the Niners were there. I mean, George has got scouts probably at almost all their practices. They got so many different players that are intriguing to a lot of different teams. But I kind of wonder, did Williams, did he go that hard because that's how hard he goes, or did he go that hard because he knew Rubio was there and he was trying to impress the Niners? Either way, it seemed like that and the combine meeting really won the 49ers, or won, the Niners over on Mykel Williams.
Yeah, I mean, I asked myself the same question, but I also asked myself, okay, if this guy is only playing it up for the NFL scouts and NFL teams, then you know his mo would be not to practice at all during the week so that he could really shine, save himself for Saturdays, and apparently he wasn't doing that. He was just kind of playing right through that injury. And that impressed the 49ers that he was able to do that. As you know, someone who covers the NFL, it's all about injuries once the season starts.
Yeah.
Everyone's injured, and it's how well a team and how well an individual can manage that. You're going to be playing while injured in the NFL. If you can continue to play at a high level, that already separates you from the field. So that's something that I think the 49ers were very impressed with.
It's funny. I don't get excited that much covering the team, but an article like this is the kind of article that if you're a real 49er guy, you would be pretty excited by some of the things that were in here. To me, if there was one thing or two guys that really were exciting when I read this article, it was the Alfred Collins anecdotes and the CJ West anecdotes. Start with Collins. You know, I didn't realize that Ahmad had that connection with the Texas O-line coach, but he feels like, he's got inside skinny on Collins, that he was great in practice and really hard to block in practice. That's a great little anecdote. But just the fact that Texas has more of a two-gap, stay home, read and react scheme, and the Niners scheme is more of a one-gap and go, penetrate, get up the field attacking scheme. And then the anecdote on CJ West was that the Niners really loved the guy and everything about him, but they didn't love his get-off, which is something that, that's literally what the Daryl Tapps and the Chris Kacericks are all only concerned about is get off, get off, get off. How do you get off the football? It means everything. And they feel like in Collins and West, they have guys that have great run traits, but also have upside potential as pass rushers. If either of these guys develops real pass rush, that could make this entire draft. Though those are incredible traits, and I'm hopeful that both those guys can be better pass rushers, just kind of because of the anecdotes that you shared here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the 49ers think that CJ West has a bad get off. I think that they think that his traits are excellent for that. He just used a different technique in college than what they use. So the raw materials are there, and he just needs to be coached up. Um, what I didn't know before the interview was that Ahmad used to be the guy that cross-checked the defensive linemen. So
Right.
the 49ers have what, like say six regional scouts, Northeast, Southeast, West, Midwest, et cetera, et cetera. And each of those guys picks a position. Like Steve Rubio, the guy that you just mentioned, he used to cross-check the offensive linemen. So that was his area of expertise. And when he was a scout, Ahmad cross-checked the defensive linemen, which meant that he and Chris Kacericks, the defensive line coach, spent a lot of time together, going over what Kacericks wants in his defensive linemen. So Kacericks was heavily involved in this whole process. And the point I'm making is that Ahmad obviously was heavily involved as well. And he's thinking like Kacericks does when he's analyzing these guys. So both of these guys are guys with huge potential as far as that quick get off, that disruption, that always attacking philosophy that Kacericks has. You asked about Collins. One thing I didn't put in the story is that they lean heavily on their R&D department as well, and the R&D
Mm.
department comes up with all sorts of metrics to measure these things that the coaches are looking for, and they've got something called the kitchen, and that's basically the hot area around the line of scrimmage. It's the area that separates the defensive line from the running back, from the ball carrier. And they said that Alfred Collins was great inside the kitchen. Like his ability to get from one spot to another in a short area, but crowded area, was what set him apart, and what gives them encouragement that he's really going to excel in what the 49ers do.
You know, the Niners have a great track record with running backs, and Ahmad supposedly loves Jordan James's strength and acceleration. I didn't realize more than half of James's career yards came after contact, which is a great indicator. But it also, I get the sense from just this one sentence here in the piece about how they feel like they hit on a couple running backs that they really like this Cincinnati kid who started at LSU, Corey Kiner. And the more I looked at Kiner's numbers, man, he's got some great numbers. Did he say anything that didn't make the piece on Kiner? It seems like they seem very excited about both Jordan James and Corey Kiner.
Yeah, you're right. He brought up Kiner unprompted. He brought up Kiner when he was talking about Jordan James. So I think that alone indicates that they think he's got something. I mean, here's something that I didn't include, or maybe I did include it. This is such a deep draft overall, and deep at running back, that some of these running backs who didn't get drafted would have gotten drafted in 2022, 2023, and they had a draftable grade on Kiner, which is why they went after him when the draft ended. Yeah, he just seems like a really, nothing fancy about him. He doesn't have blinding speed. The size is good, et cetera, et cetera. He's just a patient runner, and just a mature runner. That's how I would describe him. And those types of runners have done well with the 49ers. I think that James stood out to them, and I got word that they were focused on him early on. Like he's a guy that they spent a lot of time with and paid a lot of attention to. And it was interesting because there were a lot of running backs in this year's class who seemed like perfect fits for the 49ers, like the one cut and go guys. There was some speed. Um, Tootin from Virginia Tech, Dylan Sampson from Tennessee. Those are guys that I sort of circled. Jaden Blue from Texas, and they
Very
sort of went.
fast.
What's that?
He was very, very fast.
Yeah, all these guys were very, very fast. They were Isaac Garendo like fast, and then they went with a guy who really wasn't fast as far as top end speed. Although Ahmad did stress that Jordan James' acceleration, his ability to get up to top speed quickly, set him apart. And basically, they like the power there. They think that his lower body is as strong as anyone's, and that's what's going to allow him to excel.
The Curtis Rourke conversation I thought was interesting too. I mean, I was wowed when Kubiak a couple weeks ago told us in the media room, he was, and we really love Curtis Rourke. I mean, you could see, I mean, he talked about his experience and how fast he processes and the decision making and the accuracy. And your article included how Mick Lombardi, the quarterback coach who took over for Brian Greasy, his job as part of this process is to evaluate the quarterbacks. And it sounds like Mick Lombardi attacked it early and loved Rourke for weeks and weeks and had plenty of time to kind of go back and review it and to talk about it. So they seem like they really think of Curtis Rourke as a legitimate player. I'm not sure if he's got NFL starter potential, but they were glowing in their discussion of Rourke. What did you take away from your sit down with Ahmad when it came time to talk about Rourke?
Yeah, I mean, you just go back a couple of years, and Greasy and Steve Slowick were the tandem, the assistant coach and the scout who scouted Purdy and really stood on the table to get Purdy in the 7th round. And so I can only assume that Lombardi and whoever the cross checker for quarterbacks were on board with Curtis Rourke. And a lot of the things that they said about Purdy, they said about Rourke. He played a lot of snaps in college, so sort of the opposite of Trey Lance.
Right.
Coming in with a ton of experience and a ton of experience, going through his progressions, acting like an NFL quarterback. And that's something that Kyle Shanahan obviously is looking for. I mean, he's a taller Brock Purdy, not as mobile, and certainly not as mobile with a partially torn ACL that he played with last year. But like Mykel Williams, I mean, this is a guy that played through a season with that injury. Imagine how disconcerting that is when you're a quarterback. You have all the pressure that comes with being a quarterback, and oh, by the way, your ACL is 3 millimeters from snapping. You got to kind of give him credit for that. And Indiana had a really nice season last year, and according to anybody, Rourke was a big reason for that.
One of the I think the most interesting things when you're covering sports is the perception versus reality, and it's amazing what winning the ultimate game does to perception versus reality. The 49ers for years and years and years went with smaller offensive linemen that didn't fit the NFL prototype. And Bob McKittrick was the head coach, and he found guys that weren't in round one, and they won championships. And because they won championships, he was hailed as genius, and McKittrick was viewed as a borderline Hall of Fame candidate in his own right. And now here we are. It's 2025, and a lot of the same things going on. The Niners have Chris Forster. He's widely thought of as a really top-tier offensive line coach. He's respected around the league. He doesn't believe strongly in drafting offensive linemen highly, or if he does, he's buried that desire for the greater good of the the personnel conversation. But he told us last year, hey, you know what? I believe you can find offensive linemen later. And we all would be making fun of him if he didn't find Dom Pooney in the third round last year. And imagine how much different Niner fans would think about the 49ers if they didn't have Dom Pooney and that hit from last year's draft. So I thought the part on Forrester believes in Connor Colby's mentality and thinks that he's a good fit, that the Niners in Iowa run a very similar scheme, but that Ahmad told you that he really likes Colby's lower body power as a run blocker. When I watched Colby's film, I loved it. I thought he looked like a veteran. I thought he looked like a guy he knew all the tricks of the trade, and yet he likes to get after it in the run game. So it's amazing. I mean, McKittrick was thought to be a genius. Niner fans love to rip Forster, and just because he loves Brendel and he loves McKivitz and they don't, and PFF doesn't, and so now it's like, how smart is Forster? And it becomes now everything's like a big referendum on him and them and this line. What did you think of what they did? They didn't get a big-time lineman, but they did get Connor Colby. They did sign Drew Moss. They have picked up some veteran tackles, though DJ Humphries doesn't sound like is going to be part of it. What's your sense of what they've done on the offensive line, and what did you think of Ahmad's commentary on Colby?
Well, he confirmed something that we've gleaned over the years from having spoken to Forster once a week, is that Forster is heavily involved in the draft and does a lot of kind of deep scouting, and I think he's obviously hard to please. I mean, it's hard to catch Chris Forster's attention if you're a college offensive lineman. And I think we've talked about this, but there was those two picks that the Raiders had right before the 49ers had their pick at the end of the third round, and they went offensive tackle, and the 49ers ended up going with Upton Stout, the cornerback at that pick. And you got to wonder whether that was, one of those two guys. We're talking about the William and Mary offensive tackle, and then the Texas Tech tackle who probably was going to be moved to guard or to center.
Caleb Rogers, yeah.
Yes, who I liked, and I thought, maybe he's a center candidate. But I think that the 49ers probably intended, or, John Lynch said this, they intended to take an offensive lineman earlier, and it didn't work out that way. But my counterpoint is that if you're so particular with your offensive linemen that there's, four or five that you like and you think can make your team, it's you versus 31 other teams. You put yourself at risk of those guys being snapped up, and that might have happened each of the last 2 years. Remember, Roger Rosengarten was swiped by the Baltimore Ravens, one pick before the 49ers were on the clock, which led to Renardo Green. So maybe this isn't such a bad thing.
If you had to say leader in the clubhouse at left guard, you have an article out today that I think's really great, and it's about guys who are poised to break out. And one of the guys that you threw in the article was Nick Skell, and I think a lot of times Nick Skell has gotten caught up in kind of a numbers game in the fans' mind, and we don't really think of him in as prominent a role, but he's obviously Brock Purdy's best buddy, and he's gotten better. And it sounds like they've made a cognizant decision here to move him away from center and to make him a guard. And is that, he's a big kid. I mean, he's 6'6", he's 315 pounds, he's smart as heck, he's pretty tough. Is Mykel going to wind up being the starter at left guard for Banks?
Yeah, I think probably Ben Barch, if you were handicapping it, would have the lead there. I mean, you remember Firster saying that, during training camp last year, he had Barch and Mykel playing both center and guard. And at some point, Firster decided that, okay, Barch is more of the guard and Mykel is more of the center. And so they practiced like that when the season began. So, that might, be some insight into Firster's mind on how he's thinking about it. But I think what happened at the end of the season is interesting. Remember, Barch came in for Aaron Banks and played well, but then almost immediately got hurt himself. And so they had to start using Mykel at left guard at the very end of the season. And Mykel had practiced mostly at center. And Mykel came in and he played well. I mean, this is at a point where I'm sure a lot of fans had checked out, and the 49ers certainly weren't in contention. But he held down that left guard spot very well, and especially well for somebody who hadn't been practicing there all season. So I think that's a real plus in his category. Both of those guys are going to be unrestricted free agents in March. They're relatively the same age. I think it's a decision about who's going to win that spot and who's going to maybe be on the 49ers for 2026 and beyond.
Two last thoughts before we say goodbye. I was a little disappointed and surprised that the 49ers sat out the undrafted market. When I say sat it out, they signed some guys, but they didn't spend nearly very much money. I mean, I don't know where they spent, but I think it's probably bottom third of the league in total expenditures. And to me, that seemed to be short-sighted. I think that's a very, very good market. I think it's a very inexpensive market. It's a market that they really benefited from a year ago, paying Evan Anderson. I thought that was a bright spot of their offseason last year. Were you surprised? I know they've had a belt tightening and this and that, but the undrafted market, I mean, the Eagles spent, probably $1 million or whatever. I mean, they gave 2 or 3 guys $250,000 guaranteed. The Niners, I think, biggest expenditure might have been on Stone Blanton at like $92,000 or something like. Are you surprised that they weren't bigger players in the undrafted market where they've succeeded in the past?
Yes, I mean, to your point, we just talked about this. This was a deep draft, so a lot of guys who weren't drafted would have had draftable grades in other years. So there was still talent to be had afterwards. And you wonder why the 49ers didn't go after an offensive tackle the way that they went after Evan Anderson the previous year. I mean, from what I've heard, Chris Kasurik had a blank check to get his guy. Remember, they didn't draft a defensive lineman in 2024. And Krueger and the scouts and one of the finance guys stayed late the last night of the draft, and they worked hard to reel in Evan Anderson, who had a lot of suitors, and they ended up paying him a lot of money. But they didn't have that push this year, and I don't know whether it's related to all the big money signings that this team is doing. Seems like there's room on the roster. Certainly could use a young tackle in that offensive line stable. So I'm not exactly sure what the reason was, but yeah, it was initially 6, and I think now they're up to 7, maybe guys who went undrafted, and maybe Isaiah Nayer stands out from a physical aspect in that group. Nayer and, of course, Corey Kiner, who we just talked about.
Yeah, no, Nayer really looked good, and I thought Nayer and Kiner probably had the highlight plays of the minicamp. Couple last thoughts. Mitch Wishnowski signed. Thomas Morstead signed. Mitch Wishnowski released, waived. Do you think this is related to the back and the knee injury, or is this more related to last year he had the lowest net average per punt of his career, and this has more to do with that than maybe the injuries?
Yeah, I mean, the injury, I think, is a big part of it. Remember, he was the kickoff guy for a while too, and that was going to save Robbie Gould from having to do that, an older kicker. And Wishnowski really couldn't handle that role very well. Couldn't really get a lot of leg under there. I know that he's got the Boomin' Onion nickname, but he was never really a big leg guy. I mean, was not known for his booming punts. He was more known for his spin and his placement, his ability to kind of finesse his punts. He was very good at. And then last year he was injured, and he's 33 years old, which is a surprise to some considering he was a 2019 draft pick. But remember, he had a career in Australia before he started taking up American football and before he went to the University of Utah. So he's a little bit older than maybe people think that he is. And I don't know whether his body was giving out, or whether Brant Boyer, the new special teams coach, just wants a stable of his guys. And why he's not having a punting competition like he is a kicking competition between Moody and the guy that they just signed. So a bit of a surprise, but in an off season where they did a lot of purging, I guess we shouldn't be surprised.
One last one, Chaz Surratt. It looks like Robert Saleh gets one of his favorite Jets to come to the Niners. Jets took this guy in the 3rd round, or I should say Vikings took him in the 3rd round. He was a quarterback at North Carolina, and then Sam Howell showed up, and he switched to linebacker. To me, this kid's switch from quarterback to linebacker and what happened in his first year is like unheard of, and maybe that's why Robert Saleh loves this kid. But he was the runner-up for ACC Defensive Player of the Year his first year at linebacker after playing quarterback. He made 115 tackles. He's obviously an athletic family. His brother Sage played wide receiver at Wake Forest. This kid's got a great work ethic, 4.5 speed, pretty strong, very raw, but Robert Saleh loves this kid's ability as a blitzer. And he averaged 10 tackles per game in his last 2 years at North Carolina before he jumped into the NFL. What do you think? Deshaun White waived. He was kind of a back of the roster guy. Chaz Surratt added. Probably maybe, guys have, probably also a back of the roster guy. But what do you think of the Surratt addition?
Yeah, him and Luke Gifford, who was a March free agency ad, are basically linebackers who are on this team because of special teams. And if you're a player who has made this team in previous years because of special teams, I think that's a signal that you're going to have to really perform because Brant Boyer is coming in and he's kind of cleaning house. They already got rid of one of those guys. Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles was somebody that they kept around each year because of special teams mainly. George Odom is another one. They've got 2 other veteran safeties, Jason Pinnock and Richie Grant, I think,
Yep.
are the other 2. Surin Neal is another guy that Boyer brought in. He's a safety by position, but really is a special teams specialist. So yeah, there's a lot of guys on this roster now who have made a name for themselves in this league due to special teams, and not all of those guys are going to make this roster. So that's probably going to be one of the better competitions
No question. No
this
question.
year. And the idea is that through that competition, that special teams unit, which has been bad, consistently bad, especially the kickoff coverage, will improve.
Well, Brant Boyer was impressive. We'll see if he can make an impact on special teams. Maddie, you were impressive as well. Thank you for jumping on KMBR. We always love rapping with you. Appreciate you. Everybody sign up for The Athletic. Read Matt. Read Vic Tafer. They're outstanding. They're covering the Niners top to bottom as well as anybody. Matt, thanks again for jumping on.
Thanks for having me, Larry.
Matt Barrows from The Athletic. We got more straight ahead. It's Niners Nightly on the Sports Leader.